Hello everyone and welcome to the Glory of Kings channel. My name is Jesse. I'm a student of apologetics, and today we're going to go over my version of the moral argument for God's existence, which is called the golden moral argument. So you might ask, what exactly is the moral argument, just before we jump into the full argument for today? Well, this is something that was actually popularized by C.S. Lewis in his books Mere Christianity, The Problem of Pain, and Abolition of Man, just to name a few. And the principal idea behind this is that there exists a universal moral law, therefore there must be a moral lawgiver. But I'm going to do something a little bit different, because it's one thing to come at it from a philosophical perspective, but I'm going to come at it from a biblical perspective and actually show that there is, in fact, a universal moral law. So here's the formal argument that I'm going to lay forward. Premise 1, there exists an objective universal moral law. Premise 2, the fundamental principle of that moral law is love. And my conclusion is, therefore, the source of the objective universal moral law must be a loving creator. All right, starting with premise 1, existing universal morality. So the Bible actually affirms universal morality. In Romans 2:15, it says, speaking of Gentiles, they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciousnesses also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them and at other times defending them. This means that even though they don't have the law of Moses, there exists another type of law called the moral law. And of course, I'm not putting, there's no moral law in the verse, but I'm just adding commentary that this particular law is something that all human beings share. Coming back to C.S. Lewis, he makes the same case in his book, Mere Christianity, and I quote, "The law was called the law of nature because people thought that everyone knew it by nature and didn't need to be taught it. But taking the race as a whole, they thought that the human idea of decent behavior was obvious to everyone." And he does a great job. I highly recommend reading the book Mere Christianity. He gives this great set of examples of human interaction, and that different people seem to appeal to a standard beyond themselves for the basis of morality. It's actually quite interesting. Now, coming back to the Bible, there actually is a summary statement in Christianity for this moral law, and we call it the Golden Rule. And this is actually the most common cited version of the Golden Rule because it's proactive and positive. It comes from Matthew 7:12. So, in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. But this summary statement seems to exist all over the world and is found in almost every major religion with several variations. So you have Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Confucianism, Christianity, and Islam. And Rubin, who is a philosopher, in his article about the genesis of the Golden Rule, noticed that there's also anecdotes and so forth across all cultures across the planet, including Aboriginal peoples from across the globe. Now, he also then says it's not golden because of its universality. It's golden because it's recognized as fundamental to human relationships, and thus associated with morality, with human morality. So even the people doing research on the Golden Rule recognize its purpose is based on morality. Now, I'm not going to go and summarize every major worldview's version of the Golden Rule, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over 3 examples here that encompass some of the major worldviews. So Hinduism: do not do to another what is disagreeable to yourself. This is the summary law. Islam: none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother that which he loves for himself. Judaism, that which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the entire Torah, and the rest is interpretation. Some translations have it as commentary. But as you can see, seeing these one after another, they're all describing something they're trying to all describe something, and they're using similar language, similar concepts. So there seems to be this unspoken rule that there is a universal morality across all the different worldviews. Now, some people have theorized that morality is just the product of evolution, and they make the case, well, you have negative versions of the moral law, then you have the positive and proactive one of Christianity, and now they have a new one called the Platinum Rule, that is, treat others the way they want to be treated. There's several issues to this, and I'm going to go over the issues with the Platinum Rule here. I'll cover the next one in the next slide, but the problem with the Platinum Rule is that it's really the golden rule with an extra step of asking people how they want to be treated. So it's not really an evolution, it's not a step forward, it's basically the moral law with commentary, right? Additionally, there's circumstances when this is not a good thing. If you ask criminals the way they want to be treated, well, they're going, I want out of prison. So that doesn't really work. What about people who are, addicted to drugs? Well, they might one day not want drugs, and the next day they want them because it's an addiction, right? So that creates some issues. What about bad parenting? I want sugar for breakfast. A chocolate banana pancakes every morning, and then you wonder why your kid's teeth are rotting and falling out. So it doesn't work in all circumstances, so it doesn't have universal application to it. Additionally, people already know this law. It's something that's already intrinsically known. It's not something that you need to ask for. I do not need to ask someone, hey, is it okay if I steal from you? By doing that, you're actually borrowing from them. You're not really stealing. You're asking for permission. So we would know that asking for permission, that just doesn't make any sense. Hi, can I punch you? I'm really mad. Like, no one does this. Like, everyone knows you don't do things like butt in line. You don't steal. You don't lie, and so forth. These are things that are universally known. In fact, this is how we teach children about morality. If you've ever seen like shows where they're talking about conflicts with kids in kindergarten and grade 1 and all that, what's the first thing they do is they appeal to the golden rule, right? So Tommy, I understand that you took Jason's toy without asking for permission. What if Jason took your toy? How would you feel? I guess I suppose. See, there you go. They know the rule. They know it. Even children know this rule. And we appeal to that as part of teaching children morality. So it's something that even children, young children, are aware of. It's not something that's taught. They're aware of it. They need commentary on how to do it, right? And maybe reminders, but that's because as human beings, we're selfish. But to say that it's an evolutionary thing, no, it's something that we all inherently know. Now, the other issue about the evolution of morality is the missing part would be an actual progression or evolution of morality. So coming back to that positive version that's found in Matthew 7, it ends with this term, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Now I want you to remember that because it comes up elsewhere in the Bible in Matthew 22. Right? And he's being asked, teacher, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus replies, love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And this is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. All of the laws and prophets hang on these two commandments. So the Matthew 7 is a summary. Matthew 22 is quoting two laws that everything else is based on. Well, what are these laws? Well, they come from the Torah, mainly Deuteronomy and Leviticus. So loving God comes from Deuteronomy, and loving your neighbor as yourself comes from Leviticus. Now you might be saying, well, what about, who's the neighbor? Isn't that their fellow Israelite next to them? Well, if you remember, Jesus addressed this in the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? Who's your neighbor? Samaritan. It's anyone who's around you. It's not specifically people of Israel. It's all people. And that's an important distinction to remember. So in summary of premise 1, everyone has the same morality, and most cultures summarize this morality with some version of the golden rule. Now, there's going to be differences in terms of best practices and cultural perspectives and so forth, because we don't all have the same culture, we don't all have the same climate, we don't all have the same ways of going about things. So you would expect minor differences in the moral, in commentary on how the moral law is carried out, right? But additionally, we would also say that it's not the product of evolution, because there's no clear progression of evolution along this. So again, premise 1 holds up as there is a universal moral law. All right, coming to premise 2, the ethic of the law is love. Romans 13:10 says, love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. So again, the Bible proclaims that the point of all laws is love. Coming back to Matthew 22, where Jesus talked about the two greatest commandments, we immediately see that love is the common denominator for both. He was quoting Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18, but as you can clearly see, it's to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. So again, love seems to be the common denominator of the Christian worldview's version of the golden rule. Additionally, love is also the summary statement of many of these other laws as well. So in Islam, right, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother which he loves for himself. So again, even in Islam, love is the object of the law, or should I say the of their religion. And then if you take a look at the Jewish one, you have an antonym for love. That which is hateful, do not do to another. This is the entire Torah. The rest is interpretation. So again, love comes up. You have ones that proclaim love as the ultimate ethic, and you have ones that say the opposite of love is not what you should be doing. In other words, don't be unloving to others. So again, love comes up again. Now, I think it would be good for a second to stop and define love. So even with C.S. Lewis, he wrote a book called The Four Loves, and he talks about love for one's family, friendship love. He talks about love between a man and his wife, and agape love, God's love for us, right? So even in C.S. Lewis, he acknowledges that there's many different types of love, right? And in today's culture, we have even more. For example, I love pizza, but I don't love my brother the same way I love pizza. That would be weird. I don't need to explain any further into that. But C.S. Lewis does give us a great definition for love. So he defines love not as affectionate feelings, but a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good as far as it can be obtained. And I think this is a great definition for biblical love. Now, what about reciprocity? Isn't the golden rule, you do good to me, I do good to you. You do bad to me, I do bad to you. Isn't it just all about fairness? Well, the problem is that's not the broader context of these rules. So let's take a look at Leviticus first, and then I'll jump to another one. It says, do not spread slander. Do not endanger your neighbor's life. Don't even hate a fellow Israelite in your heart, but rebuke them frankly so you don't share in their guilt. Do not seek revenge. Do not bear a grudge. So what's this saying? This is saying, hey, even if your neighbor wrongs you, don't return the favor. Take the high road. You are to love your neighbor as yourself. So put it in another way. If I wronged someone, I would hope that they would show me some level of mercy, right? That's the idea here. So it's saying, hey, you're wronged by someone, deal with it frankly. Don't try to get revenge. Just try to move past it. That's what the broader context of Leviticus is. Love your neighbor. Now, when we look at the golden rule from Hinduism, we have something similar. So after the law is stated, it says, conquer anger with mildness and evil with good. So even from worldviews on opposite ends of the globe, they still acknowledge that this is not about reciprocity. It's not about fairness. It is about love. Now, what about human flourishing? Well, I would say it's the result of following the moral law, but it's not the basis of the moral law. So there are situations where actions that help with human flourishing can be against the moral law. For example, why is it a moral thing to take care of seniors and persons with disabilities, even if they can't contribute to society? Why is this a moral thing? When we were going through the pandemic, we heard about long-term care facilities not being able to hold their own, and there was lots of seniors dying from COVID and so forth. But why was that? Why were we horrified by that? Why was that such a big deal? Well, because the moral law is based on love. It is the steady wish for the ultimate good of a person as far as it can be obtained. It has nothing to do with what they can contribute to society. If people follow the moral law, think about that. Think about a world where everyone loved each other and wanted the ultimate good for each other. Humanity would be so much better off. Unfortunately, that is not the world we live in, right? We live in a fallen world where human beings have messed things up. We know what the moral law should be. We just don't do it. And that's part of the problem. So what about situations where immoral acts are loving, such as lying to save someone's life? So let's give an example here, because I think this is better illustrated with an example. Let's use the case of Corrie ten Boom. So she lived under the regime of Nazi Germany, and she was put into a situation where they were asking for the Jews to be handed over to Nazis to be executed and taken to concentration camps and whatnot. So here's a situation where if she hands Jews over to the Nazis, they're going to be harmed, and she knows it. But if she lies, right, that's also immoral. So either action is immoral. So what do you do here? Well, if love is the arbiter of right and wrong, then it becomes clear, right? Is it a loving thing to hand the Jews over to be abused and murdered? Certainly not. Is lying the loving thing to do here? In this very unique situation, it would be. Because think of it this way. If you are dishonest about Jews that exist so that they don't get handed over, you're actually being loving to the Jews in the sense that you're saving them from punishment and death. But you're also being loving to the people who you'd be handing them over to, because they don't have to commit an atrocity. And that's something that they may or may not agree with depending on their situation and who it is and all that sort of stuff. But the case could be made that it's actually a loving thing to lie here. And that's actually a dilemma that's solved by love. So again, this is evidence for love being the arbiter of right and wrong. Now, what about moral dilemmas, such as, there's a train coming down the street and, down the track, and you can flick the switch and it can either hit, a family member that you're really close to, let's say my son, or it could hit a random group of people. How does love deal with that? Well, here's the problem with that moral dilemma. This actually proves that love is the basis of the moral law, because you could justify either action as loving. So this moral dilemma exists as a moral dilemma because of love, right? So there's no technical way to solve this, you know, partly because we have a special love for people in our families, right? They're part of our inner circle, and we're supposed to take care of them. So I thank God that this is not something that we ever really have to deal with. I certainly don't control trains, so you know, I'm not expecting to have to be in a situation to lose people, you know. But this moral dilemma exists because of love. So if anything, this is evidence that love is the foundation of the moral law, not debunking it in any sort of fashion. So, conclusions. Love holds up as the best explanation for the moral law. It's not reciprocity. It's not human flourishing. In fact, human flourishing occurs best when the moral law is being observed. And moral dilemmas and issues like that actually prove that love is the ultimate ethic. So with that, we'll move on to our conclusion. So, exists a loving moral lawgiver. So the Bible tells us that love comes from God because God is love. Now, I want to take a second to remind people that the definition of love is a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good as far as it can be obtained. And this is something that must come from a mind. So it must be a person or intelligence of some kind. Why? Because love requires a number of things. It requires agency, the decision to love, patience and selflessness, the care that goes behind love, respect to love, compassion, commitment, empathy, and kindness. All of these things are wrapped up in the term love. And even going back to C.S. Lewis's definition, you know, it's a steady wish. Just even think for a second. What objects or natural processes have the capacity to wish something, or to desire something, or to love something, you know, or have respect? None of them do, because they don't have agency. So it must be an intelligence. There's no way around that. The real question becomes now is who is that intelligence, and what can we know of them? However, we can infer a number of things about this creator. So the first is that he must be transcendent in order for the law to be universal. So it can't have a purely human origin. Number two, he must be just. And why we say that is he cares about fairness. He's giving laws so that human beings can have better interactions with one another. So obviously there must be a sense of justice and fairness. But additionally, he must be merciful. Why? Because the definition of love is it's for the loved person's ultimate good. So if someone makes a mistake, carrying out immediate justice would not be a loving thing, because you remove the possibility of remediation, you know, for a person to become good, for them to learn from the situation and do good going forward, right? So you remove that if you are coming at it from a purely just perspective. So you have to have some capacity for mercy. So there is this bit of tension that happens between justice and mercy if the moral law is summed up by love. But the real question is who does this sound like? Well, it sounds an awful lot like someone by the name of Jesus Christ, whose life, death, and resurrection is the embodiment of love. John 3:16-17 says this: "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." My friends, that means God has a steady wish for the world's ultimate good as far as it can be obtained. And by extension, your ultimate good as far as it can be obtained. And that's why he came down, so that we could have eternal life. He came and he made a way for us to have relationship with him. So if you are not a Christ follower, I'd like to take the opportunity to extend an invitation to you to pick up a Bible and read about what God has done for you, about how he came into this world and died so that we could be in relationship with him, that he came and he took away the violations that we have to the moral law. And that is my apologetic on the moral argument. If you enjoyed this video and you want to know more about the Christian worldview, please feel free to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when our next video comes out, because they are not coming out on regular basis. As well as feel free to share this video with someone who you feel needs to hear the message. And that's it. We'll catch you next time.